say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, wave your hand and say no. Listen, why would you even sell dope? Poisoning the land, knowing that the blood stains on your hand. You can wash them once and you can wash them twice, but the only thing will clean them is the blood of Christ. Don't you remember when we marched for the freedom we wanted? And not for our kids to grow up and haunted by dope. Liquor or crack cocaine, this stuff destroys the thinking and it fries the brains of our young men and women too. Look up, young America, tell me what will we do when the Colin Powells become extinct and the Harriet Tubman cease to think, because dope has taken over the mind and the young folk continue to drink from the vine of rap. I mean toying with dope, a young brother being born without no hope, like Moses tried to lead the people to the promised land. It's hard when you got a gang of rocks in your hand. Some say I don't smoke it, I just deal it. But check yourself and be for real when the feds kick in your door one night and tell you that you have the right to only shut up and let's be friends, cause homeboy, this is where the party ends. I know my parents love me cause they got me up every Sunday to learn the tricks of Satan, but nowadays it's get up and polish your days. Shall we carry this on another year? Peace, y'all. I'm almost out of here, but check it. The penalty's hell, an eternal home, because you sold dope out of a phantom top brown. You toyed with dope like a fool never learned, taking the chance of eternally burning. You said forget it, I'm selling it whether they like it or not. So take your eternal seat where it's eternally hot. To impress the ladies, you sold dope like an enemy, so burn all the way through infinity. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand. Come on. Well, it was just enough time to figure what I'd done, to pull a stop on all my fun. Instead of going to school, learning how to get paid, I opt to hang around stores drinking beer all day. But this kind of stuff they call fun in the hood got me all tossed up like I knew it would. I act unconcerned because I wanted to ball. Just like Humpty Dumpty, I took a great big fall one Tuesday night in my cell in the hole. It dawned on me that I was losing my soul, so I looked back in retro of what Jesus said. So clear were his readings, the writing read. It was time to appease him, get on my knees and give up the street games that I once played, and I did. And ever since that day, I can truthfully say there is hope. But first you got to raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Raise your hand and say no to dope. Come on, raise your hand and say no. Come on, come on. Peace, y'all. Say no to dope, my motto is. Say no. Say no. And say no. Say no, say raise your hand. Raise your hand and say no, say raise your hand.